to the Fight Monsters podcast. Today we're talking to real people fighting real monsters.
Fight monsters, fight monsters. You're listening to the Fight Monsters podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Fight Monster Show. I am your host, Steven Norberg, and today is a special episode. It's part 2 of our endurance series, talking about how endurance in the midst of adversity can relate to fighting monsters. So today we have a very special guest, wonderful person I'm lucky enough to call my friend. I'm excited for you to meet her. Kier, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Steven. It's an honor to be part of this, and I'm so grateful to have the chance to share more about these stories with you and those listening.
It's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about the wild adventure that you embarked on some number of years ago, endurance racing, and kind of your experience with the sport and all those things?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and thinking when I started identifying as a runner or endurance athlete, and my jogathons when I was in grade school probably weren't the most emblematic of my future ability to run for many, many, many hours on end. But I think growing up in Central California, Bakersfield and Woody, we have a ranch in the mountains out there. And just, I think, being outdoors and moving through the wilderness always was something both my brother and I had as kids. But fast forward, my first marathon was not actually until I was in college. And that was in 2004. And just building from that, after I crossed that first marathon finish line, I had this very clear conviction that I wanted to do at least one of these races for the rest of my life. Lord willing, I'd be able to. And it kept building on from there. And that's true for, I think, many people who run trails and ultras and endurance running. They, start with like road racing or whatnot, and it just kind of builds from there as we find new ways to explore this beautiful world. So my first ultra was a 50-miler in Vermont, and that was in 2012. And I've sort of had been on the ultra marathon circuit since that time, and then started doing more kind of solo adventures, traverses, just to run around the wilderness wherever I was living, either in New England or the Pacific Northwest, doing fun adventures with my brother, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later. But it all just really, built year to year. And I think with my confidence to move through the wild, powered by my own 2 feet, it really it became a true core of my every single day to make something, feel like I could power through the day with that movement in some way, shape, or form.
That's so cool. I've actually hiked with your husband and some friends on a very small part of some of the trails that you've gone on, you've raced on, and maybe the 50 miles that you ran. Walking for 5 hours for 10 miles completely did us in. So I can attest to the intensity of some of the things that you've done, which is very cool. Can you share a little bit about maybe some of the races that you found to be the most interesting, or any challenges that you're really excited about tackling in the near future, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. So I think that so much of my endurance training or adventures, it really does stem back to getting to see or support my brother Gavin in doing something, and then I latch on to this concept well, that would be awesome if I get to do it too. And when you ask about my future goals, I've had a long-standing dream to be able to race in the Western States 100, which is one of the most prestigious and thus very difficult to get into 100-mile races in the world. And because of its the ultra marathon scenes like growing popularity over the years, it's just become like very, very difficult to get into this race. But my first experience getting to see it was actually crewing and supporting my brother who had gotten into it. And I just remembered I was waiting for him at an aid station, and it was like mile 70 something, and I saw this young woman. I don't know who she was, but I just saw her from a distance. She just looked so strong, and she was getting her fuel, and had just was getting ready to finish the race. And I just felt this sense of, I want to be that person someday. Like, I look forward to training up my body. I'd never run anything beyond a marathon at that point. That was really my first entrance into trail running, which is very different than the road racing. And just since that point, I've just really had this dream of getting to do it. And obviously getting to support my brother through that event. And then I crewed and paced a friend there as well. It's just become a longstanding dream. And it takes a lot of work to, like, you have to qualify every year. And up until just this year, it was like you had to qualify every consecutive year to keep your number of tickets in the lottery. And I have about 5 years running a consecutive qualifying races, and still haven't had that lottery draw. But it's a dream of mine to be able to do it. And I think, part of what's made it meaningful is that it has not been easy to, be able to not just like train for a race and complete a race that's is eligible for that within like this, yearly timeline. But doing that in addition to med school and now residency, and obviously with the pandemic that everything's sort of been broadly affected. But it's just something that's been really important to me because of how clearly I visualize, like, that is a dream of mine and a dream of my heart that I am not going to give up on, even despite a lot of different challenges that might make it a dream that will take some time to get there.
Yeah. And you brought up med school and residency, and I want to talk about that a little bit later because that seems like a whole other marathon in its own that you've embarked on and been a part of. But can you talk a little bit about the ways that you motivate yourself, and especially the kind of training that you have to do to take on 50 or 100-mile traverses or competitions?
Yeah, so I really, my personal strategy, I mean, there's clearly books and many training guides and podcasts and coaches that exist for guiding people to, how to train for your first 50 miler, how to train for your first 100, or getting into the ultra scene in the first place. For me, it's just been daily pounding of the trail or pavement. I mean, whatever I had accessible to me. And it's just been consistency. For me, I find I derive so much joy and a sense of peace, even if I'm like feeling pretty crummy physically or tired or whatever. Like, it's not like every single run is this blissful experience at all. But there's just something so, that I just derive so much appreciation for with each run that I do. That draw gets me out there every single day. So I've always had this idea, like, hey, if it's just a mile, like, I'll be really proud of that mile that I get to do. That strategy of at least just consistently getting out there, like, on a daily basis, which, is probably not optimal for recovery. Like, there's no question I overtrain in some ways, but that has just been how it's worked for me over the years. So I think, clearly, like, when you sign up for, or a motivating component of all this is that step of signing up for a race. And it's not like, the first time I signed up for a 100-miler, obviously I'd never run that distance before. But it was really, it's that whole, in reflecting on that experience, it was so powerful when someone, like a friend of mine who I had run with and had helped crew at Western States for, I just remember very clearly he put this idea in my head, like, well, absolutely, you can run a 100-mile race, and before that, it's like I had thought that would be really great to do, but it was almost this uh, word of encouragement from someone to say, like, hey, like, you can do this, even though there was no like pre-existing like demonstration, like, yeah, I could cover that much mileage on my own 2 feet. I had not done a 100-mile race yet. And so I just think that I don't know, I share that story of just having a friend speak some sort of hope into, like, hey, like, you can do this, as part of like really opening up this whole idea, like, yeah, like, I'm gonna sign up, and that becomes this, it's just a motivating process, because then you do figure out, okay, I should increase my mileage to this process. How does that work with my existing schedule? Like, what's actually doable? What's tenable? And it just gives you this like sense of, like, I'm training for this, like, this dream. And anyway, lots of exciting thoughts there.
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah.
I'm really struck by what you said about your busy schedule and how you don't always have a lot of time some days to train. So you try to just take, if it's 1 mile you can do, you try to really focus on that and give it your best. And I was struck by, just kind of the obvious connection. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this, the Fight Monsters podcast, is many of the obstacles in life, the monsters that we face, I think are probably appropriately compared to some of these ultra marathons, where it really isn't like a single moment where you get victory. It's a very long and arduous struggle. And the idea of breaking it down into, today, I can only do one small thing that's going to get me slightly closer to where I need to be to overcome this thing. But I'm going to take that one small piece, if that's all I can do, and just make it my best. And to me, I find that very comforting and encouraging, and know that, and I
Yeah.
know that, I've gotten intimidated, and I think it's easy to look at these really hard challenges in front of us and to think there's no way I can do that. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if you've used that method of just breaking things down into bite-sized pieces, or even I'm curious to know the thoughts that go through your head when you want to give up and quit because the training or the race is just so intense and feels impossible.
Ab- Absolutely. I mean, as you're sharing that strategy, I mean, that's absolutely what I employ with every single time I'm out, completing some, whatever distance it is. I mean, but yes, like for a 100-mile race, I've often found myself like, okay, I'm just going to get to the next 5-mile marker, and you just break it into these bite-sized chunks. And sometimes it's like just by the next mile, and or 500 feet or 10 feet, whatever it is that you're like, I can get myself to this point, and then you just keep repeating that. And it's breaking in those bite-sized chunks is definitely a strategy that is transferable, as you said, across so many domains of our life. Because when you have some problem or monster in front of you, it can feel overwhelming if you're trying to take it all in this in its whole, and you have to tackle it literally one step at a time, oftentimes. So 100%, like, I
Yeah,
am using that strategy, and all the time, for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Have there ever been any extremely adverse conditions where you just felt like you wanted to quit, like it was just way too much? And I'm curious, any of the training or the race conditions where things really started to get intense and difficult for you?
Yeah, so I think this is where the discussion about the mental fortitude of, at least in, one of the things I found so powerful in this experience of running long distances and diverse terrain and terrible weather or challenging conditions is just the power of the mind. And yeah, so a book that I've been reading recently is Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And what resonates from the book that I've read so far and listening to his podcast is it really is like we have to have our why straight before we have the hows and the whats. And I think for, your question of how do you, like, are there times that you want to quit? And I mean, there are so many reasons that your body is just maybe at times screaming at you, like, please stop. Like, you're tired, you're hungry, you're thirsty. Like, you would much rather prefer to be in a comfortable setting. And this is where, like, the why behind, like, why am I even pushing myself and my body and my mind to be out here right now? I mean, that really carries me through. And, I have found ways to motivate myself that, like, this is something that I'm just curious if my body is able to get to the end point of this, or climb the summit or reach this, do this traverse. There's times that I motivate myself with a cause, that I'm raising support for a meaningful cause. That was really hugely important for when I was training for Ironman Arizona and raising support for our dear mutual best friend Joey, who had passed away, and raising support for his scholarship. Like, I didn't even have time to think about my, like, pain or suffering or whatever that I was volitionally choosing to put myself through in that race in the 100-degree weather or whatever it was, because I was just so motivated by the why. Like, this matters to me, and it's just that prevents your mind from even falling into temptation of, like, why am I even doing this? Like, which is definitely something I've felt on many accounts, and that's the dangerous slippery slope of getting yourself into a bind when if you lose the mental game, you're it can be a struggle to get back on track.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Here, can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to have and foster a support system around you, and what it looks like to just try to be healthy through this monumental effort of training and racing? So I feel like that's a really relevant and appropriate thing to talk about, because I'm sure there's a lot of challenges mentally and physically to take care of your body, or you can really hurt yourself.
Yeah, this is something I consider myself constantly a work in progress on. I will say that having a supportive spouse, and John is just an amazing source of encouragement, that, like, he knows how I derive so much joy from running, and him supporting me on, like, getting, he'll, like, pick me up at the end of a long routes I've done or something, or bring me water, or he's just been so incredible in showing that sincere support. I think that goes a long way. And then, of course, with my family, like, a lot of my time running is often catching up with family. I call my mom often every single day, because I am either run commuting or, on some sort of trail run, and I'll just give her a quick call to check in. And she's been so gracious to not be annoyed by the constant, like, pitter patter of my feet all the time. So I think that kind of category of just, like, whoever's in your network, like, whatever group of people can speak encouragement into you. And, that's often family, for a lot of people, but friends or others who, can be like, oh, that's awesome that you're, getting out there, and good job. And I think that goes a long way, but it definitely is not the, I think that so much of it has to come from yourself, like, because, oftentimes you're not going to necessarily, like, I don't run because I'm getting like external praise from other people. That's not at all the driver. So I think that sense of support, like, you have to have that buy-in that this is worth it to you to go through. And then, of course, like, I think of fuel, like, fueling your body, like, nutritionally, you can think of it in that level, but also with encouragement. I listen to so many awesome things while I run. If I'm not talking on the phone with family, I'm listening to a sermon or a podcast or an audiobook, and I'm always just learning. I'll often, turn it off if I'm like in stuff that's a little more technical where I need to like focus. And sometimes I just like to enjoy the sound of birds chirping, or be able to have all my senses in tune with Mother Nature. But I find that's that sense of fuel, like fueling not just my body, kind of from the nutrition side, but fueling my mind while I run has been very helpful in terms of a sense of support, at least for my journey.
That you said that really stuck out to me about the support system, and talking about the motivation of raising money because of your dear friend Joey, our very close friend Joey, and how that enabled you to do something that you maybe otherwise would not have been able to do. And I know for me, just thinking about some of the hard and darker times in my life, those are the times I felt very isolated. And I think a lesson I learned was that I really needed people, and I needed the love and the inspiration and the encouragement that comes from the people around me and our support system. And kind of hearing you talk about that, I think is a really good reminder that we can do things with the strength of other people that we couldn't do on our own. I think that's true. And I think maybe it takes some humility to accept that other people have such an extraordinary role to play in supporting us and helping us, but without other people in our corner, it makes it a lot more difficult, I think, to overcome the challenges that come our way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully said, friend. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to change gears here a little bit now and talk about some of the monsters that you faced. I know in race and training, and there have been some pretty challenging things that come up in your story, if you wouldn't mind telling us about that.
Yeah. So I know that I'm actually wearing my Boston Marathon jacket from 2013. I think is one of the monsters I know we had talked about as being a potential point of discussion here. And for those who may not know or recall, but 2013 was the year of the Boston Marathon bombing. And I'm very proud that I have this year was my 10th consecutive Boston Marathon. And so by back calculating, I was definitely there the day of that tragedy. And I share that story as a monster for many reasons, because I felt that, I mean, it was obviously just a horrific day. There's definitely been some work I've had to do, I think, in just sort of not really acknowledging, I think, what like the proximity to those explosions like had on me and my reaction, and sort of some fear and, just things that like kind of popped up unexpectedly. Like I personally, was not injured. I was just in very close proximity after finishing when everything happened. And just seeing kind of the city and that traumatic experience, it's taught me a lot about, like kind of post-traumatic growth and what can happen. That day was also very motivating to me to think about how can I serve others, and do I have the skill set I desire to be there for others on a day that brings about so much suffering and and hardship. And, I think part of my like natural desire to want to be like present on the scene and be useful has been very motivating to my current path for emergency medicine. And so that day was, it plays an important role in not just thinking about what a true like monster, has been of just seeing terrorism in action and being, seeing the effect it can have forever on race, a city, a race, a community, whatever you want to frame it as. But I mean, it just has had such a profound impact on people for good reason. But it's also how that monster has been a motivating force for good in wanting to affect kind of how I could potentially serve others through medicine and, in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like that was really impactful for you.
Yeah.
What was it like going back the next year and running? Was there a noticeable difference, or what were the emotions that came up with that?
Yeah. So, 2014 was so powerful in seeing how the whole running community in Boston and, really everyone who felt this sense of connection to the Boston Marathon and what it symbolizes, just rallying together and saying we're coming back and we're coming back strong. And sort of the Boston Strong theme and all those things come together there. But that year was really special for so many reasons. But it was the first year that at least special to me personally, because that was the first time I had actually done the quote unquote double Boston. So I started at the finish line that year and then ran to Hopkinton to join everyone who was getting ready to run right back to Boston. And it was really special in that my husband, John, who, as you know, is one of your best friends, it was his first Boston Marathon. And given that he had been treating patients who were injured from the marathon bombing the year prior, getting to run alongside him and other first responders was so meaningful on so many levels.
So cool.
So I spent a lot of my day giving lots of high fives and hugs throughout the whole course. Yeah.
I love that you came back the next year and ran the marathon twice. It's sort of a triumphant, experience, and that's just really, really cool to hear. Yeah.
It was special.
Yeah. Now, I know you had a training experience, kind of a near-death experience when you were running, and if you would tell us about that story, I think that would be really, really neat to hear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as I was sharing earlier, my running has evolved over the years. And, while I was, running competitively in ultra marathon courses, and I was, like top 10, top 3 on the podium, whatever, it's usually a podium in ultra races like a block of wood or something. It's nothing fancy, but it's raw and it's lovely.
Podium.
Yeah. But I was doing well, and I was excited to feel that when I was going out there, I was actually kind of surprising myself with what I was able to accomplish with these races. But as we were making plans to live in the Pacific Northwest, I was eager to push myself to do more traverses and feel more comfortable with, okay, when I don't have the buffer of an aid station, how will I respond to that, and what can my body do? And then also, my brother Gavin, who and his family who live out there. There's just endless places to go explore, and he and I have been pretty consistent about scheduling some sort of what we call sibling adventure something just to build our bond as siblings, which has been really meaningful for us over the years. So we've climbed Mount Rainier together. We've run rim to rim to rim of the Grand Canyon, and we just have done some like really epic things together and have viewed beautiful things together. So all of that context kind of leads up to July 2019, which is a day that Gavin and I were out on. Really, it was just a training day, which included some like epic things, which, climbing Mount Stewart, which is an incredibly notable peak in the Eastern Cascades, was just the starting point of kind of what was going to be some sort of 24-hour push in the mountains. And this was just this was kind of my life that year. It was so awesome. Like, I didn't necessarily know all the details of what Gavin and I would be doing, but we would just, we'd have a ton of equipment, we'd be ready to go, and we were just ready to go out for these long pushes. So this one definitely took some more planning because of the various equipment we knew we'd need for the terrain. But we sort of had a long time window of, we could be out there 18 hours, we could be out there 36 hours, we're not sure. It will just depend on kind of how things are going. So the short version of the story is we're going up this, beautiful summit, and pretty close to the summit, and my crampon slipped, and I tumbled backwards. And though I was fighting with my life, or fighting for my life, to self-arrest, which is using my ice axe to actually stop myself from sliding thousands of feet down this mountain, I was unable to successfully do that, like kind of earlier on, because of the way I was tumbling. And it was by God's grace that there was this kind of crevasse rock area that essentially stopped my slide, and it was likely what saved my life, and that, of course, wearing my helmet. And so we were in a very precarious situation. We were, at 9,000 feet in the middle of this like very wild area, very remote. We were probably eight-ish miles from the trailhead. And I, in the midst of this fall, my ankle was completely twisted around, and ultimately we learned it was broken, and all the tendons shattered to pieces. So really, the chance of a self-rescue was a slim chance given the terrain. So we were in a tough place. Thankfully, we'd spent a lot of time in the wilderness, and we always go over prepared. I mean, I've learned so many important survival skills and mountaineering skills from Gavin, just by his example and by spending time in the outdoors together, just putting in the at-bats together. And, we were able to kind of focus on the things that were mission critical, which is, get exposure, like make sure like we're getting ourselves warm, and are we going to continue to fall together, or are we like in the midst of this crazy rock fall? Like it's a pretty impressively dangerous mountain, and so there were a lot of things that we had to think through there, but we were so blessed that there were some Good Samaritan adventurers out who just so happened to be climbing the North Ridge, and where their descent happened to occur not too long after this injury happened, and we were able to kind of just be in solidarity together, which was a huge blessing. And were able to call in a rescue, which was the U.S. Navy essentially coming in with their air asset, which was able to pluck me off the mountain a number of hours later. It was beyond surreal. I thank God every day for the gift to have the day before me. There were no guarantees for that, for sure. I was very, very lucky that the nature of my injury was not life-ending and kind of only temporarily life-altering, in the sense that it was an injury that I could have some hope of regaining function. But I will say, I just said it wasn't life-altering, but it definitely has been life perspective altering or fully shifting. I think I've always had a sense of gratitude for every single day. Was, as we talked about earlier, losing our friend Joey at such a young age and for no reason that will ever make any sense to us, I think has just made us feel this sense of deep appreciation for the time that we do have, and that we want to make each moment count. And I think that right now I still am trying to figure out, what it means to have this, what, if you call it a second chance, but it feels like I've had this this additional chance to I still have some work to do, and I'm still always in the process of trying to figure that out and make sure I'm living up to whatever that calling may be. So a lot to expand on there, but the Mount Stewart fall has been life-changing for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story with us. What was going through your mind as you were falling, and then how long did you have to wait for the helicopter to come and pick you up, and just how did you process what was going on during that time?
Yeah, so honestly, I was just trying to self-arrest, and that it was just my body was trying to flip over, and it's humbling, like, how quickly it happens, and it's an unbelievably surreal feeling. Like, I am falling, I am out of control, and I am trying to salvage this. And there wasn't this, I don't even think I had a chance to be fearful. It was just try to self-arrest. And when I stopped, or like they crashed into this rock pile, I was facing upward and looking up at the sky, and just felt this sense of complete awe that I was breathing and I was alive. And and that's sort of when I think medical, so that was kind of my faith elements, I think, coming in, like, wow, God, I cannot believe I'm still breathing. And then it was this sense of my medical training coming in, like, okay, like, head to toe, what are the damages here? And it was kind of during that time that my brother, who witnessed this entire process, and that has its own trauma with it. He's, an Army Ranger. He's been in combat. He's been through a lot. But this was the first time he saw his sister nearly die in front of his eyes. And so it's been a traumatic thing for us both to be processing. But he was able to safely get to me. And that's sort of when I think that mode of just, okay, we're gonna work through this together. Like, we're in a tough situation. This is not ideal, but we're gonna work through it together. And thankfully I had my wits about me, and I was able to contribute in part of that discussion. But there was never panic. Yes, it was tenuous, but I was never, I didn't cry. I just was so focused on like I already survived this, like I'm going to survive. Like if I survive that fall, like I'm not done. Like I'm ready. I'm gonna crawl if I have to, like all the way out of this thing if I have to. But it took your question about how long it took for the helicopter to get there. It was about, and I think 8-9 hours or so before they were able to lift me up from the mountain. And I will say, and I've shared this with others, I mean, that was the most that was the ride of my life. And I was praying very loudly and consistently during that process of being lifted up into the sky. But it was just the most beautiful view of Mount Stewart. The moon was out. It was sort of backlit. It was just this sense of awe to be in creation, and that the mountains are wild, they're beautiful, and I felt so small but so grateful, like all at the same time. So it was a sense of peace during that very memorable liftoff, and quite an adrenaline rush, I guess.
Yeah, such an extraordinary sort of confluence of different feelings and thoughts and emotions, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It's interesting to me, just that, you mentioned fear, and I think fear always comes up in a conversation about monsters, and certainly you mentioned that with the Boston bombing too, with the marathon. And
Sure.
I know sometimes people tend to experience fear in the moment, but a lot of times it's the fear after the fact that will sneak into our lives that makes us fearful years after a traumatic experience. I'm curious if you've had experiences with fear going back to the mountains or training, or just in other situations where the fear has come back and you've gotten to wrestle with it.
Yeah, in a very specific example where this has come up. So just before the pandemic hit, the last time that John and I traveled together was out to Hawaii. We went to go hike the Kowal Trail, which, my ankle was probably not like in optimal shape to do this, but it was sort of this, it's rare for us to have a week off together, and it was something we had been looking forward to. And the trail, for those who have heard of it or seen it or perhaps done it, it's this absolutely gorgeous trail over, literally on the edge of these glorious mountains out in Kauai. Like, I know you've done part of it too, right? So it's just,
I need to interject just very briefly. I'm sorry to derail, because I think it's one of my favorite stories. It was, I think, the 10-year anniversary that John, your husband, and I had met as freshman college roommates, and he was going to go to Kauai for a medical conference, and you were going to go with him. This was maybe 10 years ago or so. You couldn't go because of some work obligation, so he called me and asked if I wanted to go with him instead of you, and I said yes. And I always would like to tease you that maybe for your 10-year anniversary with him that you would go to Hawaii. But anyway, I love that after your injury that this was where you went and you hiked that trail. And we didn't hike very much of it, I don't think. I don't think I was a motivating enough factor to get him over those mountains, but that's so cool. Please continue.
Well, that's awesome. No, I know that your trip helped to plant this seed for him. So that was I thank you for that. And I thank you for being such a great partner to him out there. But it was really interesting, because that for me was, it's, hilly or whatnot, and there's climbing up and down. It's not like a true like mountain summit climb, but it is not for the faint of heart if you have a fear of heights, because you're literally on the edge, and it's just these a lot of exposure along the way. And so I'm gonna pause right here. I think John's boy's coming here.
Great.
Hey, John. Oh, John? Oh, maybe not. Okay, we'll restart. Oh, no. Anyway, maybe he'll come in later.
He
We'll
heard
pause it.
us talking about him, I guess. Somehow he knew.
He heard. He knew. Um, okay. So this trail is not for the faint of heart if you're afraid of heights, because you're essentially just facing heights the entire time, being on these very exposed edges, but there's absolutely stunning views. But this sense of a monster in my life has, and it's something I'll keep having to work through, but this being kind of the first adventure I'd had really since my fall, I was kind of I was just a wreck internally. I was mentally, I was just like, I'm terrified that John's gonna fly right off this mountain, and I'm gonna fly off this mountain or this cliff, and I was mentally in a tough go, but I was kind of keeping that all in and just like putting one step in front of the other, or one foot in front of the other. And there was this point where I was like climbing upward to I just lifting myself up on this part of the trail, and the way that my backpack tipped, one of my Nalgene bottles, I hadn't put the carabiner on it, and it just plummeted down. Like it just, and of course it was like this meaningful Nalgene that like both my brother and I have, and it just like the wheels like came off, and poor John is dealing with like a weeping Kirstin in the middle of this trail, probably not in an optimal place to have kind of a little bit of a emotional breakdown. But I think just all that fear and all that unprocessed emotion and sense of like, am I ruined? Like, am I unable to go do beautiful things that I used to have so much joy in? Like there were just all these thoughts swirling around. So John, being the wonderful person he is, and knowing me well, he left it up to me. Like, I mean, it was sort of, like, Cure, like, I just want to spend time with you. Like, we've already seen such beautiful things. Like, this is, like, what do you want to do? And this is where, going back to earlier parts of our conversation, it was like just bite-sized chunks. And I was like, let's just get to that gate. Let's just get to the gate like a mile up, and we'll reassess and reevaluate. And I got to the gate, and I was like, okay. And it's just like my confidence started coming back, and I just was able to change that mindset of, instead of fearing every single step, just sort of embracing the beauty around me. And that mindset shift and tackling things in bite-sized chunks really helped. And we were just reflecting even last night on, I mean, the beautiful beach that is so remote, and the crazy, like, very sleepless night because of, like, I think we were both fearful that the ocean was going to, like, draw us in because of our campsite. I mean, it was beautiful, but maybe a little too close to the water. And I only remembered one mat, not two. So anyway, we laugh about the key missing pieces from our gear that night, but it was absolutely stunning. And I was very proud, so proud and thankful to return back safely, kind of overcome that in real time, because I think it was an example of where I had no idea. Like, I had no idea, like, how unprocessed, like, or how that monster would, like, materialize, and not in a convenient situation at all. And I think that story, where I hope it's helpful for others, is how it's hard when, I think a complicating factor is of, like, when you feel like you're dealing with monsters, like, processing like these monsters of my life is how that can affect the people around you and the people that you love so much. Like, you know, if I had said, no, I don't want to do this, like we're going back, like I know John would have been totally supportive, but you know, I would have deprived him from that beautiful opportunity that we ended up having, you know, at the end of the trail, or to kind of affect his trek. And I'm not saying like one way was right or the other at all, but I think that's just a complexity that when we see how this can affect those around us that we love, it's a whole nother layer of having to deal with the challenges of our lives that we have to have like a good framework of how to address that.
Yeah, I think that's really profound. Just thinking about the cost of, you know, the very real cost of monsters, and the damage that we face through adversity, and how it really cannot be contained. It bubbles out in all sorts of situations, and it touches the people around us. And
yeah.
How long did it take after your fall to be able to walk and run and kind of get back up to normal, or mostly normal?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I felt like I could name it by week as I was like fixated on kind of my weekly progress as my recovery was going. But you know, July of this year will be 2 years since everything happened with the fall. But I was, not able to bear weight for, a few months. And my first walking mile that I timed was 49 minutes. And I remembered like wearing my trail shoes, that the last time I had worn them, or at least this version, I was these Brooks Cascadias that I really like. And I had worn them not for the day that we were on Stewart, but the day before that I'd run this beautiful trail run up in the Alpine Lakes wilderness, and I felt like such a rock star. You know, I was going out for this like cool solo traverse, and I had taken this great picture of like the Brooks Cascadias looking over this beautiful Alpine lake. And then the next time I took a picture with these shoes, like my ankle is still the size of a massive marshmallow relative to the other. And here it took me 49 minutes to walk a mile. So that was a slower mile than I'm used to. But it felt like such a miracle, that I was even able to walk, because of just, the sense of the injury. Like, I wasn't quite sure what would be possible until they were able to evaluate me. And I was literally training for my longest trail run ever. It was the Bigfoot 200, which is this absolutely epic trail through the Pacific Northwest. I was in such remarkable like endurance running shape, and I was feeling so strong, and like to be, see my, once all the caveats of how grateful I am for life and all the gratitude, like I hope that's very, very clear from my story. But still reckoning with like, how do I deal with this leg that is completely non-functional now? Like my calf atrophied like within a week. It was like, this was like a decade of consistent training to like get myself to this this place. And how does your muscle mass just atrophy that quickly? It's remarkable what the human body does. But to just trust and believe that, hey, like it's gonna take that first step, and then it's gonna take like 20 feet, and then it's gonna take 500 feet, and then someday it will be a mile, and eventually you'll get to run. And it was just it was those bite-sized chunks. Like, if I can get to this, I'll be able to get to this, and really visualizing like I am healing. I'm not just I've heard some other incredible women in trail running use this language of, as opposed to saying like this leg is broken, like this leg is healing, like this leg is, or this component of my body is healing. which I really love that framework and mindset.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so neat. I love the way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, you're now doing your residency after recently completing your MD as a medical doctor, and you talked a little bit about sort of the inspiration after the Boston bombing, about leading you maybe down this path or pointing you along the path to going that route. But could you tell us a little bit about what that was like? Because I know previous to your MD, you also got a PhD and a master's before that. So certainly this was a long, circuitous way to becoming a doctor. A double
Yeah.
doctor, I suppose. But yeah, were there any obstacles with that, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah. Well, I think the theme of endurance, it's endurance running and maybe endurance education in my life. So I just really
Absolutely.
like long, hard slogs, apparently. But yes, so grateful. I mean, what a blessing to have the opportunity to have this education. So yes, I had completed the PhD in health policy and could not let go of the dream that I may be able to provide patient care as being a physician, and that I was so grateful that I was able to start medical school thereafter, and that this dream, it felt kind of like a Hail Mary at that point in my life to go ahead and give it a go. But I was so grateful that the way it worked out, and to be able to uh, stay at Harvard for that training and just meet some of the most remarkable people, just who are so committed to alleviate human suffering in all forms. It was just such a powerful experience. But yes, I think that the marathon bombing day, it's just helped to be this concrete reminder that why I've been drawn to, I mean, medicine, like I could serve in any single capacity, like to alleviate suffering, no question. But I think what drew me specifically to emergency medicine is that sense of kind of, no matter where I am, if I'm in the middle of the trail, if I'm in the middle of downtown Boston, if I'm in rural Rwanda, where we had had the chance to live before, how can I pursue a field that could be useful in a diverse array of settings and potentially more austere environments, or ways that, just when something unexpected happens, how can I be useful? And I think it was very telling when I was speaking with some different physicians, even before applying to medical school, that when people are, on the plane, or I mean, before the pandemic, when people were flying more regularly, whenever there was an announcement like, oh, is there a physician on board, or a medical provider on board, the fact that not every single trained MD felt this like sense of excitement, like, yes, like I'm ready, like put me in, coach, was very telling to me, because I thought, oh, this might be why I should do something along the lines of emergency medicine. I think that's more, at least I think a larger proportion of that crew is ready to throw their hand up and race down to whoever might be not doing so well. Of course, any physician would do that, but I guess not everyone's as eager to raise their hands. So I've been told. So I've been told.
Definitely a very special group, special breed. Yes.
Yeah.
It'd be great if you could share with us maybe any lessons that you've learned. Say maybe you could go back and talk to the younger Kirsten, and impart some wisdom with things that you've learned the hard way. Through the adversity, through the monsters you faced. Is there anything that you would say, or just general reflections of how you've grown and what you've learned?
Yeah. So the theme of continuing to be a work in progress should be clear, because I feel that there will be lessons that the older Kier will need to share with me now, to help me through ongoing struggles and ways of processing grief and hardship. But something that's been very helpful to me recently, and something I would have liked to have shared with my younger self, is this sense of embracing the uncertainty, trusting that, the story has been written, and we are just in the process of kind of seeing what that story is going to, what how the chapter will unfold, and kind of embracing the uncertainty with hope and gratitude, and as positively as we can. It's going to take as much energy to be downcast and kind of approach it with this, negative mindset as it can be with a positive mindset. Now, I do completely want to share that, there is, like, I think a real concern around kind of toxic positivity and just saying, like, everything's fine. That's not healthy. I think it's really important that you, in a lesson I would have wished I could have embraced at a younger age, that just act, saying, like, everything's fine, even when it's not, can be damaging to you. And so it's good to be vulnerable when you are suffering, and that can help produce a sense of closeness with people around you, and help to really build, I think, that sense of a support network that can make you more resilient with the challenges to come. Because challenges will definitely exist. They exist in every way, shape, or form for everybody. Like, that is a certainty in life. But even when we feel out of control, we're on the side of a mountain and there's, like, no one in sight to be there for your rescue, or whatever the monster might be in front of you, you have some control in the way you're responding to that situation. And that's just those are a few principles that I would have tried to convey to my younger self, and will have to keep reminding myself today.
That's right. Yeah, I find that the best lessons are the ones that I have to keep immersing myself in and keep reminding, because they're ones I'll use almost every day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's very profound. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being a part of this show and letting us hear a little bit about your life and the lessons that you've learned. And having known you for some years now, I just wanted to say that you're one of the most humble and kind people that I know. And I think a lot of people who see you wouldn't, and meeting you, would be struck by that, and they wouldn't necessarily immediately think that you have a PhD and an MD from Harvard and a master's from Cambridge, and that you've done all these extraordinary races and you've done all this great work around the world. And I admire that, and I think that it's a rare quality to have humility and kindness, and that's something that I've thought a lot about, and in interviewing people for the show and just thinking about through my own experience, what are the values that I want to grow in, and what values do I think really matter in fighting monsters? And it's not overcoming adversity to become prideful and full of yourself, and to be able to really stick it to whoever or whatever was the cause of the adversity. It's really about personal growth and becoming a better person and being stronger on the other side. And just want to thank you for that and appreciate that in you. And kind of to wrap up, as I always do, are there any questions that you want to ask me at the conclusion here?
Well, thank you for those really generous words, Stephen. The feelings of admiration is right back at you, brother. And, one comment, and then I would love to ask a question. But as I've been reflecting on your, this whole frame and the way you've titled of fighting monsters, what I love about it is that it's there is an active component to this, right? That it's not just, to fight is to be actively in in the moment and addressing the issue at hand. And this is not a passive process. And your comment about the importance of growth. I mean, it is having that growth mindset, no matter the challenge. Like, how can I grow from this experience? Like, how can I grow from this hardship? What is, like, given the challenges in front of me, given these constraints before me, what is the best possible self I can be through this? And that may be being extremely vulnerable and opening up and really deepening an important friendship that you could miss out on that depth with if you like weren't vulnerable with a friend, or reaching back out to a family member who you haven't been willing to engage as often. Or I mean, what there's like countless scenarios there, but I think there is a growth component to the fight. And I just really appreciate you making that the title of kind of this whole initiative and movement. And so just thank you for inspiring all of us with that. And just all the different stories that you're featuring, and such profound challenges that people face. Like, it's just, everyone's story is so powerful. And so thank you for featuring them.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. And stories are sometimes the only thing that we can control. That we have the power to own our own story and say what happens, and we can't always choose the monsters in our life, but
Right.
we can talk about it, and we're the one who can decide. I'm gonna share that, and no one else can take that from us, no matter what.
Sure.
And we can control
Yeah.
the narrative around our story and talk about, and even decide where it goes in the future. Yeah.
So, with that, a question I have for you is, what have you learned about yourself so far through this process of hosting a new podcast, and with these various stories that you're featuring? Has there been something surprising that you've learned about yourself in this endeavor, and what is it?
Yeah, I like that question a lot, and I have been thinking about that recently. And one of the first things is, if I feel kind of awkward asking people personal questions about their lives, and then often feel like, people are sharing these really just honest and vulnerable and beautiful things about the real life and their struggles, and I don't always know how to respond. People share sensitive things, and I want to sometimes give them a hug, or I want to just have the right thing, or I want to help and fix in the moment. And think I'm learning. I think I'm learning that sometimes just listening really well is one of the best gifts that I can give, and it's something that I've decided I really want to get good at. I want to get better at. I want to be able to listen to people's stories and not feel like I have to interject or say a really smart thing or say the right thing, but just to be able to listen and let it be okay that someone else's words, we can just sit with it. And so I think it's helping me hopefully not be so self-conscious and not try to control everything, because when you're recording, especially on video, hours of conversations, I think it's a good lesson to just be okay with, coughing or saying the wrong word, or sometimes I stutter a little bit, and all these things. It's good to be okay with that, and just put it on the internet and then let it ride, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the gifts that you've given to listen, and you are stellar at it. And I appreciated the points that you would make out of my summaries or whatever, kind of my responses. It was really special to kind of hear how, what you were reflecting. So it was helpful for me as well. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. That's so great. So yeah, thanks so much, Kira. It's really great talking to you. Thanks for sharing with our listeners the wonderful tale that is your life, or at least a small piece of it so far. And I can't wait to be able to see you, your husband John, sometime in the near future.
We can't wait. It's so good to see you, Stephen. Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Monsters is a non-profit public advocacy organization that promotes the awareness of bullying in all forms.
Conditioned to make your mental beat like a drum with a piece to the heart and a piece to the chest, and you can't take no more. I fight against bullying in all forms, all forms, all forms. Fight monsters, fight monsters. You're listening to the Fight Monsters podcast.